Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of the Rosa and Rubini podcast, Making Sense of This World. My name is Manas Chavla, and as always, I'm really pleased to be joined by CEO and Head of Research, Brunello Rosa. Brunello, this week we're talking about the big, beautiful bill that puts global financial stability at risk. I think just the title of this bill gives us an idea of who came up with it and what it involves. But this was a sort of a massive bill that was recently passed through Congress and makes some pretty important consequences for U.S. financial stability over the long term. Uh, could you tell us sort of more recently what has been going on into the Trump administration on the economic front, on the fiscal front, on the trade front? That's the context for this.
Absolutely. Um, uh, the Big Beautiful Bill was, a major piece of legislation that had been passed by at least one branch of Congress. The House now is going to the Senate, but many other things occur at the same time. Um, for example, Trump threatened the EU with a 50% tariff in case they didn't show more resolve in reaching an agreement with the US. And then over the weekend, a phone call between von der Leyen and Trump eased the tension, and the imposition of this 50% tariff was postponed until July 9th. So the original 90 days were kept. Of course, he can claim that without that kind of threat, the EU will never come back to the table. But the reality is that um, also, there's quite a level of unpredictability that doesn't help those kind of negotiations, also because they are extremely technical, extremely complicated. I mean, it's
Hmm.
not simply buy more bonds, buy more weapons, buy more Boeing. That would be easy negotiation, right? So unless you're satisfied with that, that can be easily resolved. Here is a question about food standards. If you want to open up, the EU market to American produce, that we know have been a long contested issue, or security and safety of any other product, including machinery, including car, and so on and so forth. So, these are very technical and complicated negotiations, cannot be concluded in 90 days. If it's 90 days, it means that Trump is simply looking for some form of cosmetic agreement on some major issues just to be defined in coming months or years, as it happened with the UK. The so-called agreement on May the 8th was in fact the agreement to negotiate. If it's that what he wants, he probably can get quite fast.
Right.
Um, Plus, there's another inconsistency here because where it says, no, these people are not going to be subject to taxes and tariffs if they come and produce in the US. Yes, sure, that can be true, maybe for cars, and we already know that it's going to be complicated. But what about the typical products that the European country exports, such as wine from France or foodstuff from Italy? They can only be produced in the countries of origin. So, all this doesn't help. If that was enough, if it wasn't enough, as we know, during the week, this International Court on Trade, which is based actually in the US, ruled that Trump's tariffs, reciprocal tariffs, were illegal in the sense that he used the power of an emergency that wasn't there. Tariffs can only be imposed by Congress. And so this has put the entire strategy in disarray. Then he appealed, and the court stopped this. Um, Ruling by the first court. So you understand that the situation is extremely complicated. Um, and it is this mess that Trump also threatened the 25% tariff on Apple if they don't bring production back in the US. But again, Apple is building in China not because of cheap labor, it's because they have made massive investments. Some of the factories are as big as entire cities. They cannot be undone in weeks. The context is complicated, and within this context, this bill that you mentioned before was passed by the House.
Yeah. And speaking of this bill, it's titled the One Big Beautiful Bill, or Triple B as it's being called, which is an interesting nod to The recent credit rating downgrade by Moody's, perhaps, sort of a Freudian implicit nod there. I mean, tell me more about this bill and what it says about the fiscal future of the United States.
So the triple B bill, and it's been mockingly called that way because um, given the recent downgrade from triple A to just one notch, so AA1, so there's not to triple B, which by the way would still be investment grade. It's clearly a joke. But actually, the net effect is going to be on U.S. fiscal position is going to be quite tough because the Congressional Budget Office estimates an increase in overall debt, net debt by $3 to $5 trillion over the next 10 years. That's a lot because US debt is already 36 trillion. That's why there have already been discussions about increasing the debt ceiling to 40 trillion, something that has not been passed yet, but will be discussed further. Now, the distributional impact is quite known. The richer part of the population will benefit a lot. The poorer part will be suffering a lot, especially because the tax cuts that Trump made in 2017 are made permanent by introducing some spending cuts, in particular to Medicaid and similar social security programs. Some savings also come from the Doge work, but as we know, they are not as big as expected. Elon Musk himself, effectively, after the passing of the bill, said, "Look, there's no point for me in cutting expenditure in such a savage way." You remember his picture with the chainsaw and so on. If you then add $3 to $5 trillion in extra debt in coming years, so why am I cutting those expenses? So it's kind of now more on his way out than on his way in. So I would say that these are the fiscal implications of the bill.
Yeah. Um, and there's also some other aspects to this that include things like tax on interest paid to foreign governments. There's a proposed Section 899. What are some of the sort of more finer print of this, and how will this affect U.S. credibility in the long run, do you think?
So this provision is particularly dangerous because in his white paper on the Mar-a-Lago Accord, call it as you want, Steve Miran, the head of CEA, has proposed the introduction of a fee for foreign entities to use, these are their words, the US Treasury market. It's kind of a privilege of using that market, which is lending money to the US, is a privilege, hence you need to pay for that privilege. The same way, if you want to sell to the US, you need to pay tariff, which by the way is paid by the Americans. In this case, no, that would be really paid by the investor. So it's an increase in taxation from 5 to 20% additional to what is already paid, which is kind of against any provision against double taxation of interest and dividends. So, I don't know how this will go down in the Senate. It might be striked out, but we don't know. Meanwhile, it's there. And this will further increase the number of people that are actually abandoning the dollar and U.S. Treasury markets because they don't trust in it. You see in the decline in the dollar and increase in long-term yields. And other such provisions have been included. Some of them I'm still studying myself, and I'll come back to that in coming weeks if I find them to be dangerous enough. Somebody says about suspensions of adhering to court rulings by the government for a period. So this kind of stuff. So I want to read them myself, the fine print, understanding how dangerous they are, and if they are confirmed, of course, by the Senate, because they might be scary, but they don't pass. So,
Yeah.
that may be less dangerous than otherwise. Meanwhile, as we speak about the dollar, the Senate, while the House was approving this, the Senate has approved the Genius Act, which is the act that legalize, so to speak, and provide a regulatory framework for stable coins, which is the kind of the backbone of the new financial infrastructure going forward, which will provide instead support to US Treasury market because given the one peg, stablecoin issuers will have to buy lots of treasury bonds to the tune of around 2 trillion over the coming years. So, the US Department of the Treasury might have found a new natural buyer of US treasuries at a time in which there might be a bit of a buyer strike of US debt around the world.
Yeah. I mean, it sort of brings into question how many of us would have expected a downgrade by Moody's, and how close the rating we are to will be to, a triple B, possibly even in the near future if we keep going down this path. I mean, certainly hitting something like a $40 trillion debt ceiling can't be good for a country like the United States or the world. As always, Brunello, thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thank you very much. Until next time.